Good morning, and thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the neglected books of the New Testament by looking at the book of Jude. Actually, we're concluding this study by spending some time looking at the book of Jude, and then we're going to move on to a study of the minor prophets, which, except for passages here and there, and the book of Jonah, are neglected books of the Old Testament, I think, in most congregations. Okay, Jude, it's a unique work. It's a singular work in all the Bible, problematic for commentators for a lot of reasons, although the points that he makes are clear enough. He's such a master communicator, but for the person who is studying the book and trying to figure out the context, the background, and things, it's really a difficult work for the student for a variety of reasons. In the first place, it's very close to 2 Peter. In fact, about 1/3 of Jude is either paraphrased or directly quoted from the book of 2 Peter. And so there's that. There's the use of extra biblical sources. And we're going to be talking about all these issues as we come to them in the text. But there's that. He references two Jewish works outside the Bible, one which we have, the book of Enoch, and one which we don't, the Assumption of Moses. But from references and quotations, we know pretty well that's one of the sources he's quoting from. And so that poses a difficulty to some people who study this book, that he would reference outside sources in that way. To me, the biggest question mark is, who is he writing to? Who is he writing about? We know what he's writing for. He's writing against some specific false teaching that this congregation who receives this letter is having to face. But it's just such a unique situation that he's addressing. He uses Jewish examples. I mean, examples that only people familiar with the Old Testament and Jewish sources would be familiar with. He makes cultural references and biblical references that a Gentile is not going to get. And yet the false teaching that he's addressing has nothing to do with the Judaizing that the Apostle Paul faced during his ministry. The false teaching resembles almost identically the Greek false teaching that Peter is addressing in 2 Peter, that John addresses in his letters. And so there's very close ties, not only with 2 Peter, but with John. So who are these people that are philosophically Gentiles, but culturally Jews? I mean, who's he addressing? These false teachers in these congregations, or this congregation that he has to deal with. Then there's the question of form itself. It has a Jewish form, and some scholars call it a Midrash, which is to take examples or passages and then apply them and link them together along a theme. But it's also it has the form of a judgment oracle, and that's evident. It really is closely tied to the book of Zechariah, and it even quotes the book of Zechariah in that way. Jude is the brother of James. That's how he identifies himself at the very beginning of the book, which means he's also the brother of Jesus. James, who wrote the book of James, is a brother of Jesus. But Jude only identifies Jesus as his Lord and Savior, the same way James does. We know from the book of Mark chapter 6 that Jesus had brothers named James and Jude. So it's not surprising to find these young men grown up to be leaders in the church, although what we know of them from the Gospels, all four Gospels, is that during Jesus' public ministry they were not in any way disciples. There's a lesson in that in itself. Jude is really unknown apart from the passage in Mark 6 and the letter that we have from him. This is a very stern letter. It's a letter of warning. It's a letter that he writes when he really wanted to write something else. And he has to put his intentions off for another day because there's an emergency, and it's the false teaching that his readers are having to face. And we'll deal with all this when we get to the text. And yet it's a very loving book. He calls his readers beloved the way John does in John's letters, and he's very effusive in his affection for his readers, as he is equally stern in his warning to them about the false teachers. One other thing, and we'll notice this as we go verse by verse, this is a book structured around the number 3. And the numerical structure of this book seems to be, for a guy with a finite mind, more evident and more evolved as a structural system than any other single passage in the Bible. But that might just be because I don't have brains enough to see other patterns. But it's not hard to find the threes in this book, and I even noticed these as a teenager, and used to spend a lot of time trying to count how many threes, large and small, you can find in the book of Jude. Well, that's our introductory period on the book of Jude itself. I just raised a bunch of questions that hopefully we can deal with as we study the book. I want to take some time tomorrow to talk about the extra biblical sources. This seems to pose the biggest issue with students of the book, and why the book of Jude itself was left off of some very early lists of New Testament books. So we'll talk about that next time. Thank you for joining me today.